The night air was thick with the scent of rain as Anesu walked home from a final errand, her mind dancing with dreams of her wedding day. Only one day remained before she would finally marry Onyeka, the love of her life. She clutched her purse closer, humming softly, lost in the beautiful thoughts of a life filled with happiness. She could almost see herself in her wedding dress, her mother's proud smile, and Onyeka's loving gaze. Then, in an instant, blinding headlights appeared out of nowhere, flashing in her eyes like a firecracker in the dark. She froze, unable to move, as the car came rushing toward her. The car spun wildly, skidding across the wet pavement, as if it were a wild animal that had broken free. Femi, the son of a rich businessman, sat behind the wheel, his heart pounding with fear. He had been out all night with friends, laughing, drinking, and living without a care. But now, everything felt different. He pulled the steering wheel with all his might, his vision still blurry from the night's fun, but it was too late. With a loud crash, the car hit Anesu. She fell to the ground, her body still, her dress stained with red as the rain began to fall around her. In a single moment, all the dreams she had carried in her heart scattered across the pavement, mixing with the rain and her blood. The world felt silent and dark. Femi stumbled out of the car, his eyes wide with shock and horror as he looked down at Anesu. Panic filled the air as people nearby ran to her side, shouting for help. Someone called for an ambulance, their voice trembling with fear. Moments later, the sound of sirens pierced the night. Red and blue lights flashed as the ambulance arrived, and paramedics rushed out. They knelt beside Anesu, checking her pulse and calling her name, trying to bring her back. They worked quickly, lifting her onto a stretcher and securing her with care. Femi watched, his heart heavy with regret, his life changed forever by one terrible mistake. As the ambulance doors closed and it sped away, Anesu drifted in and out of consciousness, wondering if she'd ever wake up to see the light again, to walk down the aisle, or to tell Onyeka just how much she loved him. The rain had started to pour by the time Anesu arrived at the hospital. Nurses and doctors worked urgently, rushing her down a long hallway. The bright lights above blurred as she was wheeled through, her thoughts drifting between the pain and the beautiful moments she had imagined just hours before. Her mind, foggy and weary, held on to one image, Onyeka's warm smile, as they talked about their future together. In her mind, she was still in that moment, standing with Onyeka, laughing under the open sky. She could see their little house, filled with love and laughter, with kids running through the yard. It was the life she dreamed of, the life she was so close to having. A small, hopeful smile appeared on her face, even as her body lay still. Anesu's mother, hearing of the accident, rushed into the hospital, her heart pounding with fear. She gripped her purse tightly, praying silently that her daughter would be okay. When she saw Anesu, pale and motionless on the hospital bed, her hands flew to her mouth, holding back a sob. A nurse gently guided her to a seat, offering words of comfort, but they barely reached her ears. All she could see was her daughter, her bright, beautiful Anesu, who had been so full of life just that morning. Meanwhile, Onyeka waited at home, completely unaware of the tragedy that had struck. He was putting the finishing touches on a love letter, one he planned to give Anesu the next day before their wedding. Each word spoke of his love, of the dreams he had for them, and of the promises he would keep forever. With a happy heart he smiled, imagining her reaction. He could hardly wait to see her face light up when she read his words. Back at the hospital, Anesu's mind drifted further, caught between dreams and reality. In her daydream, she saw herself in her wedding dress, walking down the aisle toward Onyeka, who was waiting for her with eyes full of love. Her mother was there, her friends were there, and everything felt perfect. For just a moment, Anesu's spirit found peace, holding on to the happiness she had imagined for so long. But then, her daydream faded, slipping away like sand through her fingers as the doctor's voice broke through. "Anesu?" he called gently. "Can you hear me?" The warmth of her dream vanished, replaced by the cold reality of the hospital bed, the beeping machines and the faces around her filled with worry. As the doctor continued his examination, Anesu's mother sat by her side, silently praying. She took Anesu's hand, squeezing it with all the love and hope she could muster. Anesu's fingers twitched slightly, and her mother's heart leapt, a spark of hope lighting up her soul. Anesu's thoughts drifted back, trying to find her way to the life she had imagined, to the love she had waiting for her. She couldn't let go. Not yet. Holding on to the vision of her life with Onyeka, she took a deep breath, determined to keep fighting, no matter how dark things seemed. Her journey was only beginning. In the quiet of the hospital room, the doctor gently guided Anesu's mother out to speak privately. Anesu's injuries were serious, but with time and care, they hoped she would recover. Her mother, overwhelmed with both relief and worry, clutched her purse tightly, her fingers trembling. She knew she had to call Onyeka. He needed to know what had happened to Anesu. With shaky hands, she dialed his number. Across town, Onyeka was still at home, gazing at the love letter he had just finished writing. Each word held his heart, his excitement for a life with Anesu shining through. As his phone rang, he saw Anesu's mother's name on the screen, and his heart skipped a beat. He assumed it was about some last-minute wedding preparation, so he answered with a smile. But as soon as he heard her voice, weak and trembling, his smile vanished. "Onyeka," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "there's been an accident. Anesu is in the hospital." The world around Onyeka froze, and his heart felt as though it had stopped. He gripped the phone tightly, his voice cracking as he asked, "Is she okay? Please tell me she's okay." "She's alive," her mother replied, "but it's serious. You need to come now." Without a second thought, Onyeka grabbed his keys and rushed out the door, his mind racing with images of Anesu, her laughter, her dreams for their life together, and the horror of imagining a future without her. He drove as fast as he could, his heart pounding with fear and helplessness. Meanwhile, back at the accident scene, the flashing lights of the police car surrounded Femi as he sat on the curb, his head in his hands. The reality of what he'd done was settling in, and his heart felt heavy with dread. His clothes were soaked from the rain, and his mind, still clouded from the alcohol, struggled to process the tragedy he had caused. A police officer approached him, kneeling down to meet his gaze. "Mr. Femi, we need to take you in. You were driving under the influence, and you caused serious harm to an innocent person." Femi didn't resist. He couldn't. He felt numb, hollow, as if his life had drained away in the moments after the crash. He thought of his privileged life, his nights of carefree fun, and realized just how quickly everything could be lost. The officer helped him to his feet, handcuffing him as a second officer read him his rights. Femi barely heard the words. All he could see in his mind was the moment of impact, the flash of headlights, and Anesu lying broken on the pavement. As they guided him to the police car, his mind whirled with regret and a desperate wish to turn back time. The doors closed and the car pulled away, leaving behind the dark, rain-soaked street where he'd forever altered not only Anesu's life but his own. At the hospital, Onyeka arrived breathless and frantic, rushing to the front desk. He asked for Anesu, his voice filled with panic. A nurse led him down a long hallway to the waiting room, where he found Anesu's mother, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She reached out, pulling Onyeka into an embrace. Together, they sat in silence, each one lost in their own prayers and hopes. Femi in police custody, the weight of his actions crushing down on him, while Onyeka and Anesu's mother sit together, waiting and hoping for the love of their lives to return to them. The steady beeping of the machines filled the small hospital room, their rhythmic sounds marking each second that Anesu lay still. Tubes and wires connected her fragile form to monitors, tracking her heartbeat, her breath, signs that she was alive, but only just. Her face was pale, her eyes closed, as though she were merely sleeping, but the deep bruises and cuts told a different story. Anesu's mother and Onyeka stood just outside the door, waiting for permission to enter. The doctor, a man with gentle eyes and a steady voice, approached them. "She's stable," he said quietly, "but she hasn't regained consciousness. We're doing everything we can, but right now, it's up to her. You can go in to see her, but please, be prepared. She's very fragile." Anesu's mother gripped Onyeka's arm, her face pale with worry. With a nod, they both stepped into the room. Her mother's breath caught as she saw her daughter lying so still, a stark contrast to the lively, joyful Anesu she had always known. Her hand trembled as she reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from Anesu's forehead. "Anesu, my sweet girl," she whispered, her voice breaking. She took her daughter's hand in hers, holding it gently, hoping that somewhere, deep in the silence, Anesu could feel her love. Tears filled her eyes, but she forced herself to stay strong for Anesu's sake. Onyeka stood beside her, his heart heavy as he looked at the woman he loved more than anything in the world. The vibrant, lively Anesu he had known was gone, replaced by this fragile figure battling for her life. He reached out, gently placing his hand over hers, silently promising her that he would be there, no matter what. "Anesu," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. We have a life to live together, remember? You just have to come back to me." His words hung in the air, filled with love and a desperate hope. In that moment, he made a vow to wait, to stay by her side, and to believe in her strength. Across the city, in the cold, stark walls of the prison, Femi sat on a hard bench, his head in his hands. His eyes were swollen from crying, and his mind was trapped in a whirlwind of guilt and fear. The events of that night replayed over and over in his mind. The flash of headlights, the impact, and the horrifying realization of what he'd done. He couldn't escape it. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her lying there, her body still, her dreams shattered by his recklessness. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hall, and Femi looked up to see his parents standing outside his cell, their faces a mixture of shock, disappointment, and worry. His father, usually so calm and composed, looked at him with a deep frown, while his mother's face was etched with sorrow. "Femi," his father said, his voice tense. "What happened?" Femi's lower lip trembled, and he felt fresh tears filling his eyes. His voice came out as a broken whisper. "I killed someone, Papa. I was driving and I didn't see her until it was too late. I didn't mean to. I swear I didn't mean to." He broke down, sobbing as the weight of his actions crushed him. His mother reached out, gripping the bars with trembling hands. Is she gone, Femi? Is the girl?" Her voice was choked with fear, and her heart broke at the thought of her son causing such tragedy. "I don't know," Femi cried, his voice cracking. "I don't know if she's alive or if I killed her. I just remember her lying there, so still. I can't get it out of my head. I didn't want this, Mama. I swear, I didn't want this." His mother's eyes filled with tears, and she felt a mixture of sorrow for the victim and anguish for her son, who was now burdened by a mistake that had changed his life forever. She wanted to comfort him, to reach out and hold him, but the reality of what he had done left her silent, her heart torn between love and pain. His father's face was hard, his disappointment visible, but there was also sadness in his eyes. "Femi, this is something you'll have to carry for the rest of your life. Actions have consequences, and now you're facing yours." He paused, his voice softening slightly. "We will get you a lawyer, but you need to understand that nothing we do can undo what has been done. You need to take responsibility." Femi could only nod, his head bowed in shame and guilt. He realized now that the life he had taken for granted was over. His carefree nights, his careless choices, they had led to this. And now, he would have to live with the fact that he had taken away someone else's dreams. Back in the hospital, Onyeka and Anesu's mother sat by her side, each silently praying for her to wake up. They stayed, hour after hour, holding her hands, speaking softly to her, sharing memories and promises, hoping that somehow their words would reach her in the darkness. They didn't know if she could hear them, but they held on to the belief that Anesu, strong and determined, would fight her way back to them. As the night deepened, her mother whispered a prayer, her voice filled with both fear and hope. "Please, Anesu, come back to us. We're here, waiting for you. Don't leave us yet." As the steady beep of the machines filled the hospital room, Onyeka sat by Anesu's side, holding her hand and speaking softly, hoping his words could somehow reach her. Each time he looked at her peaceful face, memories flooded back. Memories of laughter, shy smiles, and stolen glances. He closed his eyes, letting the sound of rain outside the hospital window carry him back to the night they met. It had been a cold, rainy evening, much like this one. Anesu, wrapped in a thin jacket, was heading home after a long day at work as a janitor at MPA, a bustling company downtown. She'd been tired, looking forward to getting home, but as the rain began to fall harder, she realized she wouldn't make it to the bus stop without getting completely soaked. Looking around, she spotted a small supermarket in front of a petrol station and hurried inside, grateful for the warmth and shelter. As she stepped inside, shaking the rain from her jacket, she spotted a man by the counter, holding a cup of hot chocolate and looking over his shoulder. He was tall, with a kind expression that immediately made her feel at ease. He noticed her almost instantly, his eyes lighting up with a friendly smile as he stepped closer. Anesu felt a bit self-conscious, knowing she was still in her work uniform, her hair slightly damp from the rain. But the man's smile was warm, and she couldn't help but smile back. "Hello there," he greeted her, holding his cup of hot chocolate. "Looks like you got caught in the rain too." She chuckled, nodding. "Yeah, it came out of nowhere, and I was heading to the bus stop. I didn't expect it to pour like this." He glanced outside at the rain beating down on the pavement, then back at her. "Where are you heading?" he asked, curiosity and kindness in his voice. "I live near the old library on the other side of town," she replied, wrapping her arms around herself to keep warm. "But it's still a bit of a walk after the bus." He nodded thoughtfully. "I'm headed in that direction. I can give you a lift if you'd like." Then, noticing her shiver, he added, "And maybe get you a hot drink to warm you up first?" Anesu hesitated, unsure if she should accept a ride from a stranger, but something in his expression made her feel safe. She nodded, smiling softly. "That would be nice, thank you." They walked to the counter, and he ordered 2 cups of hot chocolate, handing one to her with a gentle smile. "I'm Onyeka, by the way." "Anesu," she replied, taking a sip of the warm drink, feeling the chocolate spread warmth through her cold fingers. They left the supermarket together, and Onyeka held an umbrella over both of them as he led her to his car, a small, comfortable sedan. The kindness he showed her that evening left a lasting impression, and they talked easily on the drive. He asked her about her job, and she explained her work at MPA as a janitor, her dreams of a better future, and her small hopes that one day she'd find something more. Onyeka listened, never once judging her humble profession. Instead, he seemed genuinely interested, his words filled with encouragement. "You know," he said, glancing over at her as they reached her home, "you're stronger than most people I know. It's not easy doing what you do, but you're out there every day, building a future. That's something to be proud of." Anesu looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. In that moment, she knew she'd met someone special, someone who saw her for more than her work or her struggles. Back in the hospital room, Onyeka squeezed Anesu's hand gently, the memory of their first meeting bringing a soft smile to his face. His heart ached as he thought of the journey they'd shared since then, the laughter, the love, the quiet moments that had meant everything. "Anesu," he whispered, his voice filled with love. "Do you remember that night? You looked so beautiful, even soaked from the rain. And here we are again, in the rain, waiting, but this time, I'm waiting for you to come back to me." He leaned closer, his eyes never leaving her face. "You fought so hard for your dreams, for your future. And I'll fight for you, Anesu. I'll be here every day, waiting, because I know you're strong enough to come back." As he sat by her side, holding on to hope, he knew that the love they'd built would give him the strength to wait for as long as it took. He would be her strength, just as she had been his, and he would carry the memory of that rainy night as a reminder of all they had yet to experience together. Elsewhere, in the prison cell, Femi lay on a hard cot, haunted by the memory of the accident and the face of the girl he'd hurt. He didn't know her name, but her image filled his mind every time he closed his eyes. His heart was heavy with guilt, and he wondered if he would ever find redemption for the life he had shattered. And so, as the rain continued to fall, each of them waited. Femi in darkness, Onyeka in hope, and Anesu, somewhere between the two, fighting her way back to the light. The morning dawned quietly over the city, casting a soft light through the hospital windows. For Onyeka, the day should have begun with excitement, laughter, and the joyful promise of forever with Anesu. Instead, he sat in the hospital room beside her bed, her hand resting limply in his. He'd barely slept, his heart heavy with worry, his mind unable to comprehend how everything had changed in a single night. Today was supposed to be their wedding day. The realization washed over him like a wave, and he felt a tightness in his chest. It was meant to be a day filled with joy, love, and celebration. Instead, it was a day of waiting, of prayers whispered in silence, of friends and family gathering not for a union, but for hope. News of Anesu's accident had traveled quickly, and as the morning unfolded, people began to arrive at the hospital. Friends who should have been seated at the wedding venue were now gathered in the sterile hospital waiting room, exchanging worried glances, sharing whispers of concern. Tears glistened in the eyes of Anesu's mother, who sat quietly beside Onyeka, her hands clasped in prayer. Around mid-morning, Onyeka's parents arrived, their faces marked with worry and sorrow. His mother, dressed in a simple, elegant dress that she'd chosen for the wedding, looked like she'd aged years overnight. She spotted her son seated by Anesu's bed, and her heart broke to see him so lost, so consumed by grief. "Oh, Onyeka," she murmured, rushing to his side and wrapping him in a gentle embrace. He sank into her arms, the weight of his sorrow finally spilling over as tears filled his eyes. "I don't know what to do, Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Today was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives, and now she's lying here, and I don't even know if she'll wake up." His father, usually a stoic man, placed a hand on Onyeka's shoulder, squeezing gently. "Son, we're here for you, and we're here for Anesu. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." Onyeka nodded, grateful for their presence. He looked at Anesu's still form, willing her to open her eyes, to wake up and smile at him the way she always did. He longed to see her lively and joyful, to hold her hand as they walked down the aisle, to promise her forever. Meanwhile, across town, the wedding venue stood empty and silent. The decorations, carefully chosen by Anesu and her mother, were untouched, waiting for a celebration that would never come. White roses lined the aisle, their petals dewy with morning mist, a quiet beauty that now felt heartbreaking. A small team of workers who had arrived early to make the final preparations stood in silence, exchanging sad glances as they heard the news of the accident. Guests who had begun to arrive were notified, and soon calls were made and word spread. The wedding was postponed. Some guests stood outside the venue, visibly shaken, as they tried to process the news. Friends who had been excited for this day now held on to each other, whispering prayers for Anesu and expressing their sorrow. The joyful music meant to fill the air was silent, and the chairs, arranged neatly for a celebration, remained empty, untouched by the happiness that was meant to fill them. Back at the hospital, Onyeka's friends and family gathered around, offering support, their faces etched with worry and sadness. His best friend David approached him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Onyeka," he said softly, "we're all here for you. Whatever you need, whatever it takes, we'll get through this together. She'll make it through this. She's strong, and she has you by her side." Onyeka nodded, taking a deep, shaky breath. "Thank you, David," he whispered, grateful for the comfort of his friends, even in this heartbreaking moment. As the day wore on, the hospital room grew crowded with loved ones, each person bringing their love, their prayers, their hope for Anesu's recovery. One by one, people shared memories of her laughter, her kindness, her strength. Together, they painted a picture of a woman whose spirit had touched every person in that room, a woman worth fighting for, worth hoping for. Onyeka sat by her side through it all, never leaving her, his hand holding hers as if his love alone could pull her back to him. He whispered words of love, words he had written in the letter he'd planned to give her today. The vows he'd been ready to speak echoed in his heart, each promise a lifeline for the future they had dreamed of. "You're my everything, Anesu," he murmured, his voice filled with emotion. "I'll wait as long as it takes. You have my heart, and I'll be right here, waiting to walk down that aisle with you, no matter how long it takes." The hospital's fluorescent lights cast a pale glow as Rudo entered, her heels clicking against the cold floor. She'd heard about Anesu's accident from a mutual friend, and though part of her was shocked and saddened, another part of her felt an emotion she barely dared to name. Hope? Rudo's heart twisted with guilt for thinking such a thing, but she couldn't help herself. As she made her way to Anesu's hospital room, memories from the past resurfaced, memories of secrets, of silent envy, and of the unspoken desires she'd buried for the sake of her friendship. This accident, tragic as it was, felt to her like a strange twist of fate, opening a door she thought had been closed forever. As Rudo neared the room, she spotted Onyeka, still sitting at Anesu's bedside. His expression was one of pure, unbreakable love, and it made her heart ache. A part of her had always wondered why Anesu had ended up with him, Why fate had allowed her best friend to win the heart of the man she had once wanted for herself. It had been almost 2 years ago, on a night filled with music, laughter, and flashing lights. Rudo and Onyeka had met at a friend's party, and though they'd only spoken briefly, the attraction had been instant. Both caught up in the heat of the moment, they spent the night together, a brief, passionate encounter that neither of them thought much about afterward. It was just one night, a memory to fade as quickly as it had happened. But everything changed a few weeks later when Anesu introduced Onyeka to Rudo as her new boyfriend. Rudo's heart had nearly stopped when she saw him. Onyeka's expression had been equally startled, and for a split second they shared a look of recognition, a silent agreement to keep their past encounter a secret. As far as Anesu knew, they'd met for the first time that day. "Rudo, this is Onyeka," Anesu had said with pride in her eyes. He's the one." Rudo forced a smile, swallowing the jealousy bubbling up inside her. She congratulated them, feigned joy, but deep down, she felt a pang of resentment. She'd wondered. Why Anesu? They had both dreamed of finding someone who would love them, someone who could give them a good life. And now, here was Onyeka, a kind, successful man, offering Anesu everything she had wanted for herself. The months that followed were filled with silent jealousy and secret attempts to sway Onyeka's attention back to her. She tried flirting with him, dropping subtle hints about their shared past, hoping he'd remember the chemistry they once had. But Onyeka's response had been steady and firm. He told her he was in love with Anesu and that nothing could change that. After he proposed to Anesu, Rudo knew she'd lost. She forced herself to bury her feelings, to pretend she was happy for her friend, but a part of her never truly let go. Now, as she watched Onyeka hold Anesu's hand with quiet devotion, Rudo felt those old emotions rise up again. She had convinced herself she was over him, that she had accepted their relationship, but seeing them together now, seeing him so devoted even in the face of tragedy, rekindled something deep within her. She felt a strange sense of opportunity, a thought creeping in that maybe this accident was fate giving her another chance. Rudo took a deep breath and stepped into the room. Onyeka looked up, surprised to see her. "Rudo," he greeted her, his voice filled with exhaustion and sadness. "Thank you for coming." She nodded, her gaze shifting to Anesu, lying so still, so fragile. How is she?" Onyeka's eyes clouded with pain. "The doctors say she's stable but still hasn't woken up. We know when or if she'll regain consciousness." Rudo put a comforting hand on his shoulder, though her own heart beat faster. "I'm so sorry, Onyeka. I can't imagine how hard this must be for you." Onyeka sighed, looking back at Anesu. "She's everything to me, Rudo. I don't know what I'll do if she doesn't come back." Rudo bit her lip, forcing herself to look sad, even as her mind wandered to thoughts she dared not say aloud. She saw the way he looked at Anesu, the way he held her hand as if his love alone could bring her back. The love and loyalty in his eyes stirred a pang of jealousy so sharp it made her breath catch. Why Anesu? She wondered again. Why not me? But she quickly pushed the thought away, reminding herself that Anesu was her best friend. She looked at Anesu's still form, struggling with the complexity of her emotions, grief for her friend, guilt for the past, and a selfish hope that perhaps, just perhaps, fate was giving her a second chance. She leaned closer, her voice soft. "Onyeka, if you ever need anything, or if you just need someone to talk to, I'm here. You don't have to do this alone." Onyeka looked at her, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you, Rudo. It means a lot to have you here. Anesu would be glad to know you're by her side." Rudo nodded, but inside, her mind whirled with conflicting thoughts. This was her chance to be close to Onyeka, to comfort him in a time of need. She'd failed before. But now, with Anesu's fate uncertain, she felt a renewed determination. She convinced herself that she was only helping, being a supportive friend. But deep down, she knew the truth, that a part of her was hoping Anesu might never wake up. As Rudo sat in silence, glancing between Anesu and Onyeka, she felt the weight of her secrets and desires pressing down on her. This was her friend, her best friend, and yet she was conflicted, caught between loyalty and envy. Rudo's thoughts swirling as she watches Onyeka, her intentions ambiguous, and her heart torn between friendship and a hidden longing. In the depths of her jealousy and guilt, she wrestles with a painful question. Is it wrong to wish for a chance at happiness, even if it comes from someone else's loss? Over the following days, Rudo's visits to the hospital became routine. She brought fresh coffee for Onyeka every morning, shared comforting stories, and tried to distract him from his worries, all while keeping her own complicated feelings hidden. To everyone else, she seemed the perfect best friend, standing by both Anesu and Onyeka in their time of need. But beneath her supportive facade, Rudo's motives were conflicted, a mixture of genuine care, jealousy, and a small secret hope that fate was offering her a chance to be closer to Onyeka. One morning, as Rudo brought Onyeka breakfast, she noticed the exhaustion etched on his face. He'd barely slept, his eyes fixed on Anesu, waiting for the faintest sign that she was still with him. Rudo's heart ached as she watched, wishing she could ease his pain and wondering, just briefly, if she was meant to be the one at his side. Across the city, Femi sat in a crowded courtroom, his shoulders hunched as he listened to the judge read his sentence. 1 year in prison for reckless driving and causing severe bodily harm. Femi barely absorbed the words, his mind flooded with memories of that night. The flash of headlights, the girl lying still on the pavement. He felt an overwhelming sense of guilt, knowing he could never take back what he'd done. As the reality of his punishment sank in, he only hoped that time would allow him some form of redemption. 2 weeks passed quietly in the hospital room, filled with soft murmurs and the steady hum of machines. Then, one afternoon, as Onyeka sat beside Anesu, his hand gently holding hers, he felt her fingers twitch. His heart raced, his eyes widening as he leaned closer. "Anesu?" he whispered, his voice trembling with hope. Slowly, Anesu's eyes fluttered open, her vision blurry. She blinked, trying to focus, and her gaze eventually settled on Onyeka. "Onyeka?" she murmured, her voice weak, her mind foggy. Onyeka felt a rush of relief and joy, tears welling in his eyes. "Yes, my love. It's me. You're awake, you're back." He squeezed her hand, overwhelmed with gratitude and love. Anesu looked around the sterile room, confusion creasing her brow. "Where am I? What happened to me?" she asked, her voice trembling. She could only remember fragmented images, a dark road, blinding headlights, but everything else was unclear. Onyeka's smile faded as he chose his words carefully. "You were in an accident, Anesu. A car hit you, 2 weeks ago." Anesu's face fell, her mind struggling to piece together what had happened. Instinctively, her hand moved to her left leg, and suddenly, a sharp pain radiated through her. She tried to move her leg, but it felt heavy, numb, and unresponsive. "Onyeka," she whispered, panic filling her voice. I can't feel my leg properly. It hurts, but I can't move it." Onyeka's expression turned serious, his heart breaking at her realization. "I'll call the doctor," he said softly, pressing the call button. A nurse entered quickly, and he explained the situation with concern in his voice. Moments later, the doctor arrived, checking her vitals and carefully examining her leg. Anesu watched him closely, her pulse quickening with fear. Her thoughts drifted to the life she and Onyeka had planned, to their wedding that had been so close, only to be taken away in an instant. With a shaky breath, she looked at Onyeka, her eyes filling with tears. What happened to our wedding day?" she asked softly, her voice barely audible. Onyeka took her hand, gently brushing his thumb over her fingers. "It was postponed, Anesu. Nothing else matters until you're well. We'll have our wedding when you're ready, no matter how long it takes." The doctor, having finished his examination, spoke up with a calm but cautious tone. "Anesu, you've suffered a serious injury to your left leg. Right now, we're not entirely sure of the extent of the damage. We'll need to run more tests to understand what's causing the pain and limited movement." His voice was steady, but Anesu's heart sank at the uncertainty in his words. A nurse quietly left to call Anesu's mother, letting her know the wonderful news. Her daughter had woken up. Anesu's mother felt a wave of relief and joy as tears streamed down her cheeks. She gathered the meal she'd prepared for Onyeka and hurried back to the hospital, her heart racing with hope. As Anesu lay back against the pillow, she struggled with the pain in her leg and the harsh reality of her injuries. She felt Onyeka's presence beside her, his hand gently holding hers, his quiet strength grounding her. She was grateful for his unwavering love, yet deeply afraid of the unknown challenges she faced. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I didn't mean for this to happen, for our wedding to be delayed." Onyeka gently shushed her, leaning down to press a soft kiss on her forehead. There's nothing to be sorry for, anesu. I love you, and I'll wait as long as it takes. You're my forever. Tears slipped down Anesu's cheeks as she looked into his eyes, her heart swelling with love even as the reality of her situation began to settle. She felt weak, broken, and uncertain of the future. But in Onyeka's gaze, she saw a glimmer of hope, a promise that he would stay by her side, that they would face this journey together, no matter how difficult it became. As her mother arrived, rushing into the room and embracing her with tears of joy, Anesu began to feel a small, fragile hope growing within her. She had her mother's love, Onyeka's unwavering commitment, and the support of friends and family. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with unimaginable challenges, but with her loved ones by her side, she found the strength to hold on. Anesu's mother, sitting by her bedside, holding her hand in relief, while Onyeka sits close, their faces filled with love and worry. Rudo watches from the doorway, her expression a mixture of relief, longing, and something unspoken. Anesu's journey to recovery is just beginning, but with her family and Onyeka's love, she has a foundation of support. A week passed in a blur of tests, doctor consultations, and hopeful conversations. Anesu clung to the belief that her leg might heal, that there would be a way forward without life-altering consequences. She had dreams of walking again, of feeling whole and free. Each test brought her closer to an answer, and though she tried to be strong, a quiet fear lingered, growing with each passing day. Onyeka stayed by her side through it all, his presence a constant comfort. Rudo visited regularly as well, offering coffee, sharing soft words of encouragement, and keeping a close eye on Onyeka. Her motives still conflicted. To the outside world she was the caring best friend, but within, her thoughts twisted and shifted, filled with jealousy and an unspoken hope that this turn of events might lead Onyeka back to her. Finally, the day arrived when Anesu's primary doctor called her, her mother, and Onyeka into his office. His face was solemn, his eyes full of empathy, as he began to explain the results. Anesu's heart pounded, her hands gripping Onyeka's for support. "Anesu," the doctor began gently, "we've completed all the necessary exams and we now have a clearer picture of your injuries." He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "Your left leg suffered severe trauma, and unfortunately, the damage to your bones is extensive. We've done everything we could to explore options to save it, but the pain you're experiencing is due to the fractures that cannot heal properly. The only option left is amputation, just below the knee, to prevent further complications and to give you a better chance at recovery." The room fell silent. Anesu's world spun, her heart sinking as she processed the news. Amputation. Her mind swirled with the enormity of what the doctor was saying. She wouldn't be able to walk the way she had before. The life she'd imagined with Onyeka, dancing together at their wedding, traveling hand in hand, all of it suddenly felt like a distant dream. Tears filled her eyes, and she clung to her mother, her body racked with sobs as she tried to comprehend her new reality. Onyeka sat beside her, his face unreadable, his hand slipping from hers. He wanted to comfort her, to reassure her that his love would remain unbroken. But in the quietest part of his heart, a crack formed, doubts seeping in despite his efforts to suppress them. Rudo watched from the doorway, noting the flicker of change in Onyeka's eyes. In her mind she felt a strange satisfaction, a sense of opportunity. Perhaps fate was indeed aligning things in her favor. Anesu looked at Onyeka, searching his face for the warmth and reassurance he'd always shown her. "Onyeka," she whispered through her tears, "I don't know what to do. I can't imagine this." Onyeka forced a weak smile, squeezing her hand. "I'm here, Anesu," he replied softly, but even as he spoke, he felt a tremor of uncertainty within him, a future he had never envisioned. Later that evening, Onyeka returned home, each step feeling heavier than the last. As he closed the door behind him, the weight of the day bore down on him, his mind replaying the doctor's words. He moved numbly to his cabinet, pulling out a bottle of whiskey. He poured himself a glass, the amber liquid shimmering in the low light, and took a long, deep sip, the burn offering a brief distraction from his thoughts. He tried to picture a future with Anesu, a future where he stood by her side through everything. But now, all he could see was her broken body, her tear-streaked face, and her words of uncertainty. The image of her missing a part of herself filled him with a deep sense of dread. He slammed his glass down, the sound echoing through the empty room. "Why?" he shouted to the silence, his voice choked with frustration and pain. No, no, this wasn't supposed to happen. He looked around, as if searching for something, anything, to make sense of what he was feeling. His mind spiraled, his emotions in turmoil, and a dark thought crept into his consciousness. A thought he couldn't bear to admit. Could he truly love someone who had lost a part of herself? The question filled him with guilt, with shame, but he couldn't shake it. His dreams of their perfect life together, their future filled with joy and ease, now felt as though they were slipping away, replaced by an image of a life he wasn't prepared for. He sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent tears. The life he'd imagined felt shattered, broken, and he didn't know if he could put it back together. Back at the hospital, anesu lay quietly, her hand in her mother's as she tried to absorb the doctor's words. Her dreams, her plans, everything she had held dear, felt so far away now. The pain in her heart was almost as great as the pain in her leg. She whispered to her mother, her voice breaking, "Why did this happen? I thought Onyeka and I would have a beautiful life together, but now—" Her voice trailed off, filled with despair and fear. Her mother stroked her hair gently, whispering words of comfort. "My sweet anesu, you're still you. No injury can take that away. Whatever the future holds, you have people who love you, who will stand by you." But as she spoke, even her heart ached, knowing how much anesu had lost. Anesu closed her eyes, letting her mother's words wash over her, even as doubts and fears lingered in her heart. She thought of Onyeka, of the life they had dreamed of, and couldn't help but wonder if he would still want her, still see her as he once had. She had seen the flicker in his eyes earlier, the quiet change in his expression that told her everything might not be as strong as she'd believed. As she drifted into a fitful sleep, haunted by fears of her uncertain future, a quiet question echoed in her mind. Would Onyeka still want her, after everything had changed? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for part 2, it's about to get even more emotional.